Hello everyone, it's time to put together some of the things that we talked about in the last videos and create a failover cluster of Hyper-V servers. So what we will have is a server on which we will create our iSCSI disks and two servers on which we will install the Hyper-V role and add them to a Hyper-V cluster. Now some of the things, of course, we talked about in previous videos, like iSCSI, for example, or failover clustering. I will not go into detail about those parts. I will have links to these videos in the description, and also you can find them in the playlist Windows Server 2012 Mega Series. So let's get started and configure first the iSCSI part. Now my iSCSI server is named BCM01 and I will remote into it. And the first couple of commands will consist of me just creating the disks and creating the target that will host the LUNs. And the last step is to permit our two Hyper-V servers that will form the cluster to access the LUNs that we just created. And we are now done with the iSCSI server. Now we need to run the following commands on both of our Hyper-V nodes. And to run them a little faster, I will just put them one after the other. So I strung all the commands together. Now let's run them against our two nodes. And everything was successful. Now on the two servers we should have two extra disks that are from the iSCSI server. Let's check on one of the nodes just to make sure. And we see that we have the disks. Okay, this looks fine to me. Now we have to install the Hyper-V role, also the failover clustering feature, and also the Hyper-V commandlets using PowerShell. And one thing, of course, if you remember, since I am running my Hyper-V servers on Hyper-V, I have to use this command to install the Hyper-V role and not install Windows feature. This is just a workaround. And if everything looks fine, I'll also run the restart computer, but I want first to run only these three commands. Okay, looks good, actually very good. So we can also run our last command. And now our computers are restarting. After the computers have been restarted, let's create also a Hyper-V switch on both nodes. This is in case we make virtual machines and we switch them from one node of the cluster to the other, of course, to be able to maintain connectivity to the same switch. The next commands, we have to run them directly from one of the cluster nodes. We can't run them through PowerShell remoting. Actually, some of them we can, but I prefer to use this whole block directly from a node. I have my commands in a notepad. Let's make the font a little bigger. And first thing, in any cluster, of course, we need to test that the cluster can be created. Okay, and the tests have passed with a couple of warnings which are not very important. Most of them are because our disks are offline at the moment. So really it's okay. Let's create our cluster. I'll call it HVO3 and I already assigned it an address that I know it's available. Our cluster is done. One more thing I want to do regarding the cluster itself is I want to also enable the PTR registration in DNS. So it creates also a reverse entry in DNS, but this will be done when we restart the cluster. It's not needed now, or at least not in this scenario. Now we have to get started on the two disks. We initialize the first disk, and these things can also be done through PowerShell remoting, at least the disk initialization and configuration, but why not do them directly here since we are already connected. This first disk will be our quorum disk for the cluster. Let's add it to the cluster since we discussed what it is. And let's set the quorum. Okay, quorum set. Now let's be a little more fast with the second disk. And run the commands one after the other. And the second disk will be part of the cluster shared volume. Actually will be the only disk in the cluster shared volume. Okay, so this part is also done. We do not need this file anymore. Let's get back to our code that we will run with remoting. And one more thing I want to do is I want to set the virtual hard disk and virtual machine path on the two nodes for Hyper-V to our cluster shared volume to a folder called VMs. Cool, this is also done. And before I continue, I just want to open a failover cluster manager and connect to the new cluster. Just so we get an idea of what's going on. So here it is, here are the nodes. We don't have any roles. In a Hyper-V cluster, each virtual machine is considered one role. You'll see what I'm talking about. Here are our two disks. The first one is the quorum, the second one is part of the cluster share volume, and the rest of the things are not really of concern right now. So on one of the Hyper-V nodes, we can now create a virtual machine. Let's say on the A node. Let's create a VM, a simple VM, 512 megabytes, name, everything okay, with a hard disk. And you see I'll put the hard disk in the cluster share volume. I specified it, even though it's also in the default settings. Let's create it. And if we look, for now, we don't have this machine in the cluster. The machine is created on the A node. If I connect to the A node, HV03A, here is our virtual machine. Also, let's connect to HV03B, just so we have a context of what's happening. And check it out. To make the machine highly available or part of the cluster, we just add it as a role in our cluster. Unfortunately, this has to be run on one of the nodes, and I already wrote this, but I did not take my own advice. I'm on the A node. Let's run from here. Now, if we look, it still appears in a Hyper-V manager, but now it also appears in the failover cluster manager, and this should be the place where you make further configurations of your machines. For example, you see that the owner node is the B node. I can, if I want to, for example, just make a quick migration on the B node. And that's it. The machine is not online, so it was even faster than you could expect, but it's now on the B node. And this is also reflected in the Hyper-V manager. So this was a very quick look into how to create a Hyper-V cluster of two nodes with a cluster shared volume as the storage. And in the next video, I'm going to show you how to encrypt that cluster shared volume, which applies also to normal clusters. If you found this video useful and liked it, please like and share, and consider subscribing if you want to see more videos from me, if you want to be notified as soon as they come up. Thanks for watching.